The clatter of silverware against porcelain plates had never seemed so loud. I looked at George, and for a second, I didn't recognize the man I'd shared a bed with for 25 years. He wasn't asking, he was giving an order. "Apologize to my sister or get out of my house," he said, with that authoritarian voice he reserved for subordinates at the company, but which lately he'd been using with me with alarming frequency. Sylvia, perched at the end of the table, as if she were the queen of that Sunday, wore a victorious smile she tried to hide behind her linen napkin. In that moment, Sunday dinner died, and so did my marriage. But what George hadn't yet realized was that to kick me out of his house, he first needed to truly own it. I remained motionless for a few moments, tasting the bitter flavor of the cheap wine George insisted on buying for dinners at home, while saving the expensive labels for when he went out with his partners. I looked at my hands resting on the tablecloth. Those same hands had sanded the walls of that guest bedroom when we couldn't afford a painter. The same hands that had signed dozens of checks to cover the holes his mismanagement created. It was curious how his memory worked selectively. For him, that house was a monument to his success. For me, it was a cemetery of my savings and my patience. Sylvia cleared her throat with that irritating sound she always made when she wanted attention, as if demanding the execution of the sentence her brother had just pronounced. The air conditioning hummed in the background. The only other sound was my controlled breathing. I wasn't going to cry. At 50, after raising 2 children who'd already flown the nest and holding things together for a lifetime, I no longer allowed myself the luxury of wasting tears on those who didn't deserve them. George stared at me, his face red, the veins in his neck bulging, awaiting my submission. He expected the Irene of 10 years ago, the one who bowed her head to keep the peace, who apologized even when she was right, just to avoid spoiling the weekend mood. But that woman no longer existed. She had remained somewhere in the past, buried under piles of paid bills and swallowed by years of strategic silences. I took a deep breath, smelling the roast I'd spent all morning preparing, and understood that this was the end of the line. Before I tell you what I did and how I turned that moment of humiliation into the most important turning point of my life, I want to ask you something quickly. From the heart, if you're listening to me now and know what it's like to do everything for your family and receive ingratitude in return, click the like button below, subscribe to the channel to follow this story, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. It's very important for me to know I'm not alone in this conversation. For you to understand how we reached this point on that fateful Sunday, I need to go back a bit in time, not too much, but enough to paint the picture of this foreseen disaster. Sylvia, my sister-in-law, has always been a toxic presence, the kind who enters your home and the energy just seems to weigh down. She's 2 years younger than George, and in his mind, she's an eternal victim of fate. Divorced 3 times, she never held down a job and lived off the handouts George gave her. The problem was that these handouts came out of our family budget, often compromising our travel plans or the renovations we needed to make. And I, as the understanding wife, let it go. After all, family is family, that's what he always said. But Sylvia didn't just want help, she wanted a place of honor. She took sadistic pleasure in belittling me, making snide remarks about how worn out I looked or how George seemed too young for me, even though we were almost the same age at that lunch. However, she went too far. We were talking about retirement and investments. I commented, without any malice, that we had tightened our belts that month to pay off the overdue property tax on a piece of land George had inherited and almost lost due to negligence. That's when Sylvia unleashed her venom. She said, with a mouthful of food and a mocking tone, "Oh, Irene, stop being so petty. George works so hard. He deserves to spend his money however he wants. You talk as if the money is yours, but we all know you just manage what he earns. You should be grateful to have a husband who supports you and not control every single penny." That hit me like a slap. Not because of what she said, but because it was a lie that George conveniently let her believe. I looked at George, expecting him to defend me, expecting him to say, "No, Sylvia, Irene contributes too. Irene has her inheritance. Irene has saved my hide several times." But he said nothing. He continued cutting his meat, nodding in agreement. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. I said with a firm voice, "Sylvia, if I didn't control every cent, this house where you're eating for free today would have gone to auction 5 years ago, and the money that supports your whims often comes out of my pocket, not his." The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Sylvia put on a dramatic crying face, looked at her brother like a wounded child, and said, "Are you going to let her talk to me like that in front of you, calling me a mooch?" That was the last straw. George exploded, slammed his hand on the table, and gave me his ultimatum. "Apologize to my sister or get out of my house." The phrase echoed in my head. I looked at him, analyzing every feature of that familiar face that now seemed like a stranger's. He truly believed he had that power. He believed I'd have nowhere to go or that the fear of loneliness would make me crawl back. What he didn't know, or chose to forget, was that I'm trained in accounting and spent my life dealing with numbers and contracts. And more importantly, he underestimated what a woman does when she needs to protect her future. 5 years ago, when George nearly bankrupted his company out of sheer stubbornness, we had a very serious conversation. At the time, I had just received my father's inheritance, a considerable sum of money that was meant to be my security in old age. George needed that money to avoid being sued and losing the house. I, loving my husband and wanting to save our family, agreed to use my inheritance to pay his debts, but I wasn't naive. I wasn't some pushover. I told him, "I'll pay, George. But this isn't a donation, it's a loan." He was so desperate he'd sign anything. And he did. We drew up a document, registered with a notary public, a confession of debt with a mortgage guarantee. In a nutshell, I paid his debts, but the house served as collateral. If he didn't pay me back, and he never paid a cent back, the house could legally be foreclosed by me at any moment. Furthermore, through a trusted lawyer friend, I had bought Sylvia's share of the inheritance, which she had desperately sold years ago to pay off loan sharks, without telling her brother a thing. There, sitting at the table, I had the power to destroy them both with just a few sentences. I could have said, "The house is mine, George, and I bought half of it from your dear sister, who betrayed you behind your back." But I looked at Sylvia's triumphant face and George's arrogance and realized that speaking now wouldn't have the same impact. They needed to feel, they needed absence to value presence, and most importantly, I needed to leave there to execute my plan with the coldness the situation demanded. If I screamed, I'd just be the crazy woman. If I left in silence, I'd be a mystery that would keep them awake. Slowly, I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I rose from my chair, smoothed my skirt, and looked into George's eyes. There was no anger in my gaze, only a deep disappointment, the kind that leaves no room for return. "All right, George," I said with an eerily calm voice. "If that's what you want, I'll leave. The house is all yours and your sister's." Sylvia let out a nervous chuckle, surprised I hadn't made a scene. George seemed confused for a second, perhaps expecting me to beg, but soon puffed out his chest, feeling like the alpha male who had reclaimed his territory. "It's good that you're learning to respect my family," he grumbled, returning to his meal as if nothing had happened. I walked to the bedroom, that room I had decorated with so much care, where every object had a story. I opened the closet and grabbed a carry-on bag, one of those small ones. I wasn't going to take everything. I didn't need to. I only took the essentials: a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, and most importantly, the black leather briefcase that was at the bottom of the safe, containing all the documents that proved who really called the shots in that house. As I folded a silk blouse, I looked at our photos in the frame on the dresser, photos of trips, our children's weddings, happy moments. I felt a tightness in my chest. Of course, I'm not made of stone. It had been 30 years. But disrespect is like acid. It corrodes love until nothing is left but skeletal structure. And my love for George had just been dissolved at that dinner table. I closed the suitcase. The sound of the zipper zipping was the period at the end of our story at that address. I took one last look around the bedroom, checking if I'd forgotten my phone charger. It's funny how in moments of rupture, we cling to practical details so as not to emotionally collapse. I thought, I have to cancel the Tuesday cleaning lady. I need to tell the front desk that I no longer authorize them to receive my packages here. My mind worked quickly, organizing the logistics of the separation, while my heart remained quietly in a corner, in a state of shock. I walked past the dining room on my way to the exit door. They were still there. Sylvia was pouring more wine for George, laughing about something, probably at me. They didn't even bother to look as I crossed the hallway. To them, I was leaving defeated, humiliated, a 50-year-old homeless woman. George must have been thinking I'd go to a friend's house to cry my eyes out and would be back in 2 or 3 days begging for forgiveness. Little did he know I already had an apartment ready, a condo I'd rented 2 months ago when I realized the situation with Sylvia was unsustainable and George wouldn't change. I always have a plan B. A woman my age in this country cannot afford the luxury of living without a safety net. I opened the front door. The air in the building's hallway was cooler. The doorman, Mr. Henderson, greeted me with his usual smile when he saw me leaving with the suitcase. "Traveling, Mrs. Irene?" he asked kindly. I smiled back, a sad but genuine smile. "Yes, I am, Mr. Henderson. I'm going somewhere I'm welcome." He didn't understand, but he nodded. I called a rideshare. While waiting on the sidewalk, I looked up at the balcony of our 3rd-floor apartment. The light was on. I could imagine the two of them inside celebrating my departure. I got into the car. The driver confirmed the address, and we drove off. As the streets of the neighborhood, where I'd lived for decades, passed by the window, I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange lightness. George's get out of my house was, in fact, a letter of emancipation. He thought he had expelled me from paradise, but in reality, he had just locked himself in hell with his sister, unaware that the key to escape was in my purse. I took out my phone. The first thing I did wasn't to call anyone. It was to open my banking app. I had access to all accounts, including the joint account we used for household expenses and his company account, for which I held power of attorney because he hated bureaucracy. George always said, "Take care of this for me, Irene. You're good with these details." Ah, George, laziness is the mother of loss. With a few taps on the screen, I began to craft my response. I didn't transfer money. That would be theft, and I'm not a thief. But I scheduled the cancellation of all automatic debits linked to my personal credit card, the electricity, the ultra-fast internet he used to watch sports, Sylvia's premium health insurance he paid for secretly and which I pretended not to see, the wine subscription, everything. I arrived at my apartment. It was small, modern, with a nice view of the city. Nothing compared to our spacious house, but it had a clean energy. I put my suitcase on the floor and poured myself a glass of water. The silence there was different. It wasn't a silence of tension. It was a silence of peace. I went to the balcony and watched the city lights. It was 8 p.m. on Sunday. The Sunday night news program must have been starting already. The routine of the country was carrying on as usual, but mine had been turned upside down. However, I knew that the real shock of reality wouldn't be mine, it would be theirs. I imagined the scene the next morning. George would wake up expecting coffee on the table. He'd look for a clean, ironed shirt and wouldn't find it. He'd try to access the internet to read the news and see the signal cut off. And then he'd remember. He'd remember that he'd sent me away, and his pride would battle his necessity. But that would only be the beginning. The real blow would come when he tried to use the corporate credit card to fill up his car and discovered that I, as a minority shareholder and statutory financial administrator of the company, another detail he ignored, had blocked the limit as a security measure and for financial restructuring. I lay down in that unfamiliar but comfortable bed. The sheets smelled of lavender. I closed my eyes, but sleep was slow to come. I kept replaying the dinner scene. Ingratitude hurts. It's an acute physical pain. But justice, justice is a balm. I knew the next few days would be difficult. He would come after me. He would try to yell. Then he would try to seduce. Then he would try to threaten. But I was shielded. I had the law, the money, and the truth on my side. As I drifted off to sleep, a final image came to mind. The document he signed, the confession of debt. That paper was my guarantee that I wouldn't leave that story empty-handed. The house, George's castle, had foundations of paper, and I was holding the match. But I wasn't going to light it now. I was going to let them realize on their own that they were in the dark. After all, the most elegant revenge isn't the one that makes noise, but the one that restores the balance of things. And the balance of that family was about to tip decisively in my favor. Just as I was falling asleep, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message. It wasn't from George. It was from Sylvia. A short message, full of venom, that made me realize the war was far from just financial. She had a card up her sleeve I hadn't expected, something that involved my children. Reading that, my blood ran cold, and I understood that to win this battle, I would have to be much more than just intelligent. I would have to be ruthless. Sylvia's message glowed on my phone screen in the dark, unfamiliar room, like a beacon of malice amidst my attempt at peace. It read, "I've already told the boys you've gone crazy. I said you left the house screaming and probably have some neurological problem. Lucas is worried. He said he's going to seek your incapacitation. You'd better come back quietly tomorrow, Irene, before we commit you to a nursing home." I read that once, twice, 3 times. Her audacity had no limits, but her intelligence, unfortunately for her, was scarce. Sylvia always played dirty, but she forgot a fundamental detail about motherhood. A mother isn't just one who gives birth. A mother is one who raises, who is present, who knows her children's breathing over the phone. And my children, Lucas and Mariana, knew the mother they had. Her attempt to paint me as crazy wasn't just cruel. It was a desperate strategy from someone who felt the ground trembling and tried to cling to anything, even the lowest lie. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart slow down. I didn't respond. Silence is the best answer to provocation, especially when you have the truth on your side. Instead of playing her game, I dialed Lucas's number. It was 11 p.m. He'd probably still be awake studying for his medical residency. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, Aunt Sylvia sent me some weird audio messages. She said you ran away from home. Is everything okay?" His voice wasn't afraid. It just had the curiosity of someone who knows their dramatic aunt. I told him calmly, without exaggeration, exactly what had happened at dinner. I told him about the humiliation, about his father's ultimatum, and about my decision to leave. Lucas was silent for a moment, then let out an incredulous laugh. "Dad kicked you out? Dad doesn't even know where the bath towels are. Mom, where are you? Do you want me to come over?" I reassured my son. I told him I was safe in my own place and only asked him not to confront his father yet. I wanted George to feel the weight of my absence organically, without external interference. I hung up the phone, feeling immense peace. Sylvia's first card had failed miserably. Dawn broke. The sun entered through the apartment window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a different light from the one that hit my old kitchen. There, at this hour, I would have been up for 30 minutes, pouring coffee through the precise pour-over system George insisted on, because he said electric coffee makers burned the grounds, setting the table with linen placemats, ensuring the bread was warm and the butter at the right temperature. Today, I allowed myself to stay in bed until 9. The silence of my new home was a luxury, but my treacherous mind wandered back to the house I'd left behind. I could visualize the scene with cinematic clarity. George waking up, fumbling on the nightstand for the glass of water I always left there, and finding it empty. He getting up, going to the kitchen with that characteristic morning grumpiness, expecting the smell of fresh coffee and finding only the dirty dishes from Sunday dinner, which Sylvia, obviously, hadn't washed. I imagined him opening the refrigerator and realizing the milk was gone. I always bought milk on Mondays. I imagined him trying to turn on the television to watch the morning news while eating stale bread, and being confronted with the message, "Unauthorized signal. Contact your provider." Ah, the internet and cable TV cut off. I had done that through the banking app at 2 a.m., claiming my primary credit card had been stolen. For security, the bank preventively blocked all recurring subscriptions. George, A man who prided himself on being connected to the world was now isolated inside his own home, without Wi-Fi, without news, and, worse, without the wife who resolved these technological annoyances. Around noon, my phone started ringing. It was him. George's name flashed persistently on the screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again and again. 5, 6, 10 missed calls. Then the messages started coming. Irene, the internet is down. Call them to fix it. Irene, where's the bank password? The card didn't go through at the gas station. How embarrassing. Irene, answer this damn phone. I read the notifications through the taskbar without opening the app, so as not to give him the satisfaction of a read receipt. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't asking if I was okay, if I had somewhere to sleep, if I had money. He was worried about his comfort, about his image at the gas station. That only confirmed I had made the right decision. Each desperate message was another brick in the wall I was building between us. I got up, made myself some tea, and sat in front of my laptop. Revenge, when well planned, is like an accounting balance sheet. Everything needs to add up in the end. I accessed George's company system. He had a small construction company, a business he inherited from his father and which I helped modernize. George was the face of the company, the man who shook hands and visited construction sites, but I was the financial brain. He had given me full power of attorney years ago, so he wouldn't have to deal with banks and suppliers. You're annoying with these things, Irene. Take care of it, he'd say. And I did. I renegotiated debts. I collected from clients. I did payroll. He didn't even know the password to the business account. That Monday morning, I made an executive decision. As a minority shareholder and financial administrator, I sent a notice to the bank requesting a change in the security keys for the company account, alleging suspicion of internal fraud. It wasn't a lie. The fraud was moral. The majority shareholder was using company resources to support his unemployed sister, something I could prove with transfer statements he made, thinking I didn't see. With the account temporarily blocked for analysis, the corporate card he used for everything, from gas for his truck to expensive lunches with Sylvia, would stop working. Around noon, my phone started ringing. It was him. George's name flashed persistently on the screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again and again. 5, 6, 10 missed calls. Then the messages started coming. Irene, the internet is down. Call them to fix it. Irene, where's the bank password? The card didn't go through at the gas station. How embarrassing. Irene, answer this damn phone. I read the notifications through the taskbar without opening the app so as not to give him the satisfaction of a read receipt. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't asking if I was okay, if I had somewhere to sleep, if I had money. He was worried about his comfort, about his image at the gas station. That only confirmed I had made the right decision. Each desperate message was another brick in the wall I was building between us. I decided to go out for lunch. I went to a simple restaurant near the apartment, ordered a home-cooked meal, and ate with a tranquility I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to listen to Sylvia complaining that the meat was tough or George criticizing the government. It was just me and my plate. As I ate, I reflected on how we gradually annul ourselves. It's a slow, almost imperceptible process. First, you yield on the movie choice, then on the couch color, then on the vacation destination, and before you know it, you've yielded your own identity. I had become George's wife, Sylvia's sister-in-law, the boy's mother. But who was Irene? Irene was an intelligent, capable woman, owner of an estate no one knew about, but who lived in the shadows so as not to overshadow her husband's fragile ego. That was over. In the afternoon, I received a call from the law firm where an old college friend worked. I had already set everything up weeks before, anticipating that the pot would boil over. Irene, the demand letter is ready, Robert said with that formal lawyer's tone. Do you want me to send it today? I took a deep breath. That was the next step. The notice wasn't a divorce filing yet. It was something more practical and painful for his wallet. It was a demand for payment for the improvements made to the property, added to the personal loans I made to his company, all duly adjusted for inflation and interest. The total amount exceeded the market price of the house he was in. "You can send it, Robert, but send it to the company address and the house. I want to make sure he receives it," I replied. I hung up the phone, feeling a knot in my stomach. I was declaring open war, but it wasn't a war of hatred. It was a war for respect. If he wanted me out of his house, fine, but he would have to pay for the foundation I built, the walls I raised, the roof I maintained. I went back to the apartment and made coffee. The afternoon was falling, and golden light flooded the room. That's when my phone rang again. This time it wasn't George. It was a landline number. "Hello, Mrs. Irene. This is the doorman from your old building." It was Mr. Henderson. My voice warned him. "Hi, Mr. Henderson. Has something happened?" He lowered his voice as if confiding a state secret. "Mrs. Irene, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. George is making quite a scene downstairs. He's yelling at an internet technician who came to cut the cable from the pole, saying he's going to sue everyone. His sister is with him, cursing at the neighbors who are looking out their windows. Don't you want me to call the police?" I closed my eyes and almost smiled. The scene was pathetic but predictable. The king of the castle was losing his composure because his subjects, the service providers I paid, had rebelled. "No need to call the police, Mr. Henderson. Let him yell. Just don't let him know where I am, please. You can count on me, Mrs. Irene. No one here knows anything. You've always been very good to us. God bless." I hung up and felt a pang of pity. Not for him, but for the man he could have been if he weren't so arrogant. George had qualities deep down, but he chose to feed the monster of his ego and listen to his parasitic sister. Now he was reaping the storm, and the forecast for his life indicated that the worst was yet to come, because until now, he had only faced domestic and financial inconveniences. He still didn't know that the house, his family's untouchable sanctuary, was no longer his. Night fell, bringing a new message from Sylvia. This time the tone had changed. It was no longer threatening, it was victimizing. "Irene, George is feeling unwell. His blood pressure is up. Do you want to kill your husband? Come home now and sort out these bills, for God's sake. We can talk." I read the message and tasted the bitter flavor of manipulation, the old tactic of illness. How many times had Sylvia used terrible migraines to avoid helping with cleaning or palpitations to ask for money? And now she was using her brother's health as a shield. I knew George. His blood pressure rose when he was contradicted, not because of a serious illness. He had the health of an ox. What was hurting him wasn't his heart, it was his wallet and his pride. I replied for the first time. I typed slowly, choosing each word as if selecting ammunition. "Sylvia, if George is feeling unwell, call 911. The number is 911. I am not a doctor, and regarding the bills, I suggest you start looking for a job because the well has run dry. By the way, enjoy the house while you can. You'll be receiving an official visit soon. Send. Block contact for 4 hours. The sensation of pressing send was liberating. I had just cut the last thread binding me to that emotional blackmail. I went to take a shower. The hot water ran down my back, washing away the day's tension. I was alone in a rented apartment with an uncertain future, but I felt more in control of myself than at any point in the last 30 years. I had recovered my voice. Stepping out of the shower, with a towel wrapped around my head, I saw a new email in my personal inbox. The subject was Confirmation of Contractual Amendment. I opened it with a racing heart. It was the confirmation from the online notary. The clause I had inserted into the company's operating agreement 2 years ago, the one George signed without reading while watching a national team game, had just been activated. That clause stated that in case of proven mismanagement or risk to the company's assets, administration would automatically transfer to the partner with proven technical capacity. I hadn't just blocked the cards. I had legally removed George from the presidency of his own company until the accounts were audited. He would wake up tomorrow not only without coffee and internet, but without the position that defined who he was. It was a harsh blow, perhaps cruel in the eyes of those who didn't know the whole story, but it was necessary because George was sinking everything to support his sister, and I needed to save what remained of the assets for our children. I lay in bed, exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I knew the next day would be the day of the real confrontation. He would come after me. He would find out where I was or wait for me at the door of the accounting office where I still kept some old clients. He would come with anger, with the force of a wounded animal. But I was ready. I had the black leather briefcase, I had the law, and I had something he never had, the ability to survive without an audience. As sleep finally arrived, a cruel doubt crossed my mind. Would he miss me? Not Irene, who paid the bills, but Irene, the woman, the companion. Or had our marriage just been a long commercial transaction where I contributed the capital and labor and he contributed his presence? The answer, I feared, would come the next day when we stood face to face, no longer as husband and wife, but as creditor and debtor. And that final conversation would define the rest of our lives. The apartment's silence was broken only by the distant sound of a siren in the street, a premonition that the emergency in George's life was just beginning. Suggested title: The Owner of the Game. Part 3. Tuesday dawned with a gray sky, one of those heavy ones you see in a city like New York when it's going to rain all day. I woke before my alarm, with that strange feeling in my stomach that mixes fear and adrenaline. I knew today wouldn't be a day of silence. Today would be the day of noise. I drank my black coffee without sugar, looking down at the street. Traffic was already jammed. People rushed to their jobs, oblivious to the hurricane that was about to sweep through my life and George's. I checked my email again. The notice of George's removal from company administration had already been filed with the Secretary of State. It was official. He was no longer the boss. He was just a partner who needed to provide explanations. It wasn't long before the phone started ringing, but to my surprise, it wasn't George. It was his secretary, Michelle, a sweet woman I had hired 3 years ago. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Irene, you need to come here, Mr. George." He broke the coffee maker. He arrived trying to access the system. The password didn't work, and when he saw the legal department's email, he went crazy. He's yelling at everyone, saying it was a coup, that you stole his company. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Michelle," I said with the calmest voice I could muster, "send all employees home, dismissed for today. Close the office and leave. I'll take responsibility." She hung up, relieved. I didn't need to go there to see the spectacle. I knew George. He was roaring, not because he was strong, but because he was cornered. I spent the morning organizing paperwork. With each document I reread, my certainty that I had done the right thing grew. There were proofs of unjustified withdrawals from the company account that coincided exactly with the dates Sylvia traveled to the beach or bought a new car. He was bleeding our future dry to feed her whims. That wasn't just mismanagement. It was financial, marital infidelity, and it hurt as much as a betrayal in bed because it involved the breach of trust in our shared life project. Around 2 p.m., my apartment's intercom rang. The doorman, with a hesitant voice, announced, "Mrs. Irene, there's a gentleman here, George. He says he's your husband. He's quite agitated. He said if you don't come down, he'll come up anyway." I knew he would find me. George could be negligent with household matters, but when his wallet was threatened, he turned into a detective. He probably pressured the accountant or followed some trail from my credit card before the block. "Let him up, Peter." "You can go ahead," I authorized. I unlocked the door and sat in the living room armchair, facing the entrance. I wasn't going to receive him standing, like someone ready to flee. I was going to receive him sitting, like someone at home. When the door opened, George's appearance shocked me, even though I tried not to show it. He, always impeccable in his well-tailored suits, was wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt with a coffee stain on the collar. His face was red, his beard unshaven, his eyes swollen from lack of sleep. He entered like a hurricane, but stopped abruptly when he saw me there, sitting calmly with a teacup in my hand. The contrast between my control and his despair was palpable. "Have you gone crazy?" he shouted, his hoarse voice cracking. "You blocked my accounts. You took me out of my company. Do you want to destroy me, Irene? After 30 years, is that it? You want to see me in the gutter?" He paced back and forth in the small living room, gesticulating. I waited for him to finish his first round of accusations. I took a sip of my tea and placed the cup on the coffee table. The sound of porcelain against glass was the only noise in the room for a few seconds. "I didn't take you out of your company, George," I replied, low and firm. "I took the company out of your hands before you bankrupted it to support your sister. Did you read the operating agreement you signed, the one that says fraudulent management implies immediate removal?" He stopped and looked at me with hatred. "Fraudulent management? I'm the owner. The money is mine." "No, George. The money belongs to the partnership, and half of that partnership is mine, and the other half you were donating to Sylvia." The mention of her name made him recoil as if he'd been slapped. He tried to shift focus, his classic tactic. "That doesn't justify it. You left home, abandoned me, humiliated me in front of my family. Sylvia is devastated, Irene. She's there taking care of me, trying to help me while you're here in this place plotting against us." That was the cue I needed. I slowly rose and walked to the black leather briefcase that was on the dining table. I opened the clasp with a dry click. "Sylvia is taking care of you, George. How interesting, because according to the documents I have here, Sylvia has been taking very good care of her own assets." I took out an old but well-preserved manila envelope from the briefcase. I held it out to him. "Open." He hesitated. He looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. And it was. With trembling hands, he took the paper and began to read. I watched his expression change. Anger gave way to confusion, then to pure shock. It was the contract of sale and assignment of hereditary rights dated 5 years ago. The document proved, in black and white, notarized and witnessed, that Sylvia Regina had sold her share of her parents' house inheritance, the house where we lived, to pay off gambling debts and loan sharks. And who had bought it? Me, through a legal proxy, a trusted attorney, so as not to expose George to shame at the time. "What? What is this?" he stammered. "Sylvia, she said her share was intact. She said she'd only let go when we sold the house someday." I crossed my arms. Sylvia lied, George, just like she lies about her illnesses, just like she lies about the money she needs. She sold her share for a pittance because she was desperate. I bought it so the house wouldn't be seized by criminals who were threatening her. I saved your family's roof and kept this secret for 5 years to spare you the disappointment of knowing your dear sister sold your parents' legacy behind your back. He fell onto the sofa, the crumpled paper in his hand. The arrogant man from Sunday dinner had disappeared. There was only a deceived man. But I couldn't feel pity now. Pity is the enemy of justice. I continued relentlessly. "So, George, when you yelled, 'Get out of my house,' you made a technical error, because 50% of that house is yours, but the other 50% is mine, bought from your sister. And as for your half? Well, do you remember the renovations, the new roof, the electrical work, the 10 years of overdue taxes I paid?" I pulled another stack of papers from the briefcase. "Here are the invoices, all in my name. Adding everything up with inflation adjustment, the amount you owe me for the improvements exceeds the value of your half of the house." I stood in front of him, looking down. "In summary, George, the house is virtually mine. I am not the guest you're kicking out. I am the owner who allowed you to live there for free." The silence that followed was heavy, dense. I could hear his ragged breathing. He looked at the floor, unable to face me. Reality was crumbling over his head. The sister he defended tooth and nail had betrayed him years ago. The wife he underestimated was, in fact, the owner of everything. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he whispered, his voice choked. That's the question men ask when they discover the strength of the women beside them. "Because I wanted us to be partners, George. I didn't want to have power over you. I wanted to build with you. But you chose Sylvia. You chose your ego. and now you'll have to deal with the consequences of your choices." He stood up, swaying slightly. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He no longer yelled, no longer threatened. He walked to the door, clutching the contract for Sylvia's share, as if it were a death certificate. Before leaving, he stopped with his hand on the doorknob and looked at me. There were tears in his eyes. "Sylvia, she's at home now, waiting for money for groceries. Then show her this." I pointed to the paper in his hand. "Ask her where she spent the inheritance money she swore she still had. And then, George, tell her to pack her bags, because my demand letter arrives tomorrow, and I'm going to file a partition action. The house will be sold. Either you pay me what you owe, or the house goes to auction." He left and closed the door slowly. He didn't slam it. The click of the lock sounded like a shot in my chest. I let myself fall back into the armchair, my legs trembling. Victory has a strange taste. It's not sweet, as they say. It's metallic. It tastes of blood and tears. I had won the argument. I had destroyed his arrogance, but I had just decreed the official end of my family as it existed. I cried. I cried not out of regret, but out of mourning. Mourning for the man I thought he was. Mourning for his blindness. I cried for about 20 minutes, until my phone vibrated again. I wiped away my tears. Life doesn't stop for us to suffer. It was a message from Lucas, my son. "Mom, Dad just got home. He's crying. He told me about Aunt Sylvia. Mom, Aunt Sylvia called Grandma." My blood ran cold. Grandma was my mother-in-law, Mrs. Celia, 85 years old, who lived in a very expensive assisted living facility that we paid for. Sylvia, cornered, penniless, and exposed, had gone for the weakest point of all. She had gone to poison the mind of a sick elderly woman. "What did she say, Lucas?" I typed quickly, feeling my blood boil again. His response came like a punch. "She told Grandma that you stole everything and that you're going to kick her out of the facility. Grandma is feeling unwell." The nurse called. That was no longer a marital dispute. That was dirty warfare. Sylvia was willing to sacrifice her own mother to get to me. I jumped out of the armchair. Sadness gave way to a cold, calculating fury. If Sylvia thought she could use her mother as a human shield, she was gravely mistaken. I knew the secrets of that facility. I knew who paid the bills. I, and I alone, knew exactly how to neutralize that poison. I grabbed my purse. I wasn't going to stay waiting in the apartment. I was going to the facility now. George was defeated, but Sylvia was still standing, thrashing like a venomous animal, and I wouldn't rest until I cut off the snake's head. I left the apartment, slamming the door. The peaceful Irene had died at Sunday dinner. The one descending the elevator now was Irene the matriarch, the one who defends her own, even if it means destroying everything else. And Sylvia was about to discover that messing with my reputation was one thing, but messing with the health of a defenseless elderly woman was signing her own death warrant. The drive to the assisted living facility was a blur of red brake lights and anxiety. The traffic of the city seemed to conspire against my haste, but my mind traveled faster than any car. I thought of Mrs. Celia, an 85-year-old woman who, despite raising a daughter like Sylvia, had always treated me with kindness. She didn't deserve to be used as a pawn in the chess game of our divorce. I arrived at the reception of the Sweet Age home with my heart in my mouth. The head nurse, who knew me well after all, my name was on the financial responsibility contract, came to meet me with a worried expression. "Mrs. Irene, thank goodness you're here. Mrs. C. is very agitated. Her blood pressure has gone up. Her daughter called, saying terrible things, that you were going to cut off payments and she would be evicted tomorrow." I took a deep breath, swallowing the urge to scream. Sylvia's cruelty had no bottom. I walked to the room. Mrs. Celia was sitting in the armchair, holding a rosary with trembling hands, crying softly. When she saw me, she flinched as if expecting an executioner. That broke my heart. I knelt at her feet and held her cold hands. "Mrs. Celia, look at me," I asked, with a choked voice. "Do you trust me?" She nodded slowly, her eyes watery. Sylvia said she tried to speak. "I know what Sylvia said," I gently interrupted. But Sylvia lied. No one is going to take you from here. Do you know why? Because I'm the one who's been paying for this place for 10 years, and I'm not going to stop. The fight is out there, Mrs. Celia. In here, you are my priority. I took out my phone and opened the banking app, showing her proof of the 6 months advance payment I had made that very morning, in an impulsive act of protection even before knowing about the phone call. See? It's paid. No one touches you. She cried with relief and hugged me. In that embrace, I felt I had won the most important battle, the battle for truth. I calmed her, waited for her to fall asleep, and left the room. In the hallway, I found George. He had just arrived, breathless, with red eyes. He saw my expression and didn't need to ask anything. "She's sleeping," I said, coldly. "And if your sister calls her again, I swear to God, George, I'll file a restraining order against her own daughter." George leaned against the wall and slid to the floor, defeated. He held his head in his hands. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I swear I didn't know she would be capable of scaring Mom." I looked at that broken man and realized the anger had passed. What remained was pity. "You didn't know a lot of things, George, because you chose not to see. You chose to believe in the fantasy that you were the patriarch provider and your sister was a poor thing, while I was the annoying controller." Now reality had knocked on the door. He raised his tear-streaked face. Sylvia confessed. I showed her the inheritance sale contract. She tried to deny it. Then she said she did it because she needed to. I kicked her out of the house, Irene. I told her to leave. She went to a cousin's house upstate. I shook my head. "Too late, George. The damage is done." He stood up and tried to take my hand, but I pulled back. "Come home, Irene, please. Sylvia's gone. The house is ours. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll pay you what I owe. But don't let it end like this. 30 years of history." The offer was tempting for the Irene of old, to return, be the savior, forgive, and move on. But Irene, at 50, the owner of the game, knew that wasn't love. It was dependence. He wanted his life's manager back, not his wife. "No, George," I replied, feeling an unshakable resolve. "The house isn't ours. The house is a problem we will resolve legally. I am not coming back. That ground you told me to leave no longer suits me. I've discovered I like my new ground, George. It's smaller, but it's solid, and it's mine." I left him there in the hallway of the assisted living facility, crying over spilled milk, and walked away. The following months were filled with painful but necessary bureaucracy. I kept my promise. I filed for a partition action. Since George didn't have the money to buy my share or pay the debt for the improvements, the house was put up for sale. It sold quickly. A young couple bought it. On the day to hand over the keys, I went there one last time. The house was empty. The echo of my footsteps in the living room reminded me of all the parties, all the Christmases, all the silenced arguments. I saw the mark on the wall where the painting Sylvia criticized used to hang. I saw the kitchen, where I had spent hours serving those who didn't value me. The sale money was divided. My share was substantial. I received my 50% from the portion I bought from Sylvia, plus a large slice of George's portion, deducting the debt he owed me. He left with enough to buy a small one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. It was a harsh but fair lesson. He had to learn, at 52, to pay a bill, to grocery shop, and to live without the protective shadow of a woman. Sylvia, well, the last I heard was that she had a fight with her cousin and is now living with an old boyfriend, freeloading, without her brother's allowance. Her bottomless pit, it seems, has no bottom, but George's tap has run dry forever. Today I'm here on the balcony of my permanent apartment. It's not that rented condo. It's a place I bought outright, decorated my way. I have plants I care for, books I read, and a silence that isn't empty. It's filled with peace. My children come to visit me every Sunday. Lucas says his father is learning to be a person, that he's more humble, and that he keeps asking about me. I don't feel anger. I just feel that everyone is exactly where they should be. George sent me a message on my birthday last week. It just said, Happy birthday, and thank you for taking care of Mom until the end. Yes, Mrs. Celia passed away peacefully 2 months ago, in her sleep. I was there, holding her hand. George didn't make it in time. At the funeral, he cried on my shoulder like a child. I consoled him, but then I got in my car and drove off to my life. Many women ask me if I don't regret being so harsh, if I don't miss the complete family. And I answer, a complete family is one where there is respect. When respect walks out the front door, love escapes through the window. I didn't destroy my family. I just refused to keep supporting the lie that held it together. My revenge wasn't to leave them in misery. My revenge was to leave them with the responsibility for their own lives, while I took back the reins of mine. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see the tired Irene, the husband's accountant, the good-natured sister-in-law. I see a woman who learned that the greatest asset we can have is not a house or a bank account, but the certainty that we are capable of getting up from the table when love is no longer being served. I built my own roof, paid my emotional debts, and finally closed the balance sheet of my life in the black. And have you ever felt trapped in a situation where you were the invisible foundation of everything? Have you ever wanted to throw everything up in the air and show who really calls the shots in your story? I hope my journey has given you courage, or at least some solace. Life is too short to live on others' goodwill. Be the owner of your home, be the owner of your money, but above all, be the owner of the game. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this confidence. It was a relief to share this story with you. Before you go, I wanted to ask you one last thing so I can feel we're close. Leave a comment here telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your city right now. I'd love to know. A big hug, God bless, and until the next story.